Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
How's it going, gentlemen? Welcome to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. My name, as always, is Scott McKay, at Scott McKay on both Twitter and Clubhouse. And as always, we invite you to join us every Monday night at 8:30 Eastern, that's GMT-4 on Clubhouse, for really controversial and fun topics where both the men and women join the room together, and it's called Dogs and Cats Living Together on Clubhouse. Join us. It's a lot of fun, gentlemen. Also, you can find me by searching my name on YouTube, Scott McKay, to find all the video goodies. Real Scott McKay on Instagram. The website is mountaintoppodcast.com, and I also am still waiting for a lot of you guys to join us over on Facebook. The topics are getting more and more interesting by the day, it seems, over there. We're talking about manliness, and we're talking about how to get better women in your lives, and so much more. The name of the Facebook group is the Mountaintop Summit. See what I did there? Join us on Facebook, guys. I have a new friend of mine today. His name is Dr. Mark Goulston, and this guy has been talking about relationships and people's personalities and interactions and crazy people and sane people for literally decades now. He's been a guest on Oprah and a whole bunch of other TV shows and has sold books that have been translated into literally dozens of languages. Today, we're going to talk about several really salient points because, man, when you're a guy like me with a history like I have, there's a lot to talk about when you have a real bona fide psychiatrist on the line. But the book that really caught my eye with this guy was the one called Talking to Crazy, How to Deal with the Irrational and Impossible People in Your Life. Dr. Mark Goulston from Los Angeles. How's it going, my friend?
It's going great, Scott. Glad to be here. I can hardly wait to find out what we say.
You know what? For the benefit of the audience listening, I did tell you that these shows are very discussion-oriented, and we often are left in amazement with where the twists and turns happened in the show, which may sometimes deviate from what the original plan was. I know I've actually changed the entire title of a show from what I had conceived in my mind to something completely different after we're done talking. And I don't know, this one may be very much par for that course. Now, you have a book called Talking to Crazy, How to Deal with Irrational and Impossible People in Your Life. And the first thing I kind of want to throw on the table is I'm going to admit to you that I got sent to a seminar years ago when I was in the business world that was held by Southwest Airlines. And Southwest Airlines, Mark, of course, is legendary for their customer service. I don't know if that still holds true, but for years and years and years, they were absolutely everybody's favorite airline here in the United States, and they were particularly known for being a little bit more fun and treating their customers with a little more social alacrity than other people. And it was Q&A time, and I was called on, and here's the question I asked. I said, how do you deal with irrational people? And I believe it was a woman who had been a flight attendant who was now giving seminars for Southwest Airlines, and she gave me a 2-word answer. The 2 words were, you can't. And it was so utterly elegant an answer and made so much sense that for years I was really feeling a lot like I was free from dealing with irrational people at all, just not having to do it. Now, along you come and you write this book, and apparently, according to the reviews for it on Amazon, you have some counterintuitive ideas that, well, I don't know, they may or may not go against what Southwest Airlines had to say. So can we really deal with irrational people?
Well, I think you can. It depends on your viewpoint. Now, there are some irrational people who are dyed-in-the-wool nasty. And if you look at all of them that way, you're going to be reacting to them in a defensive or an attacking way. But if you think that they just don't know any better, there are different ways, and there are counterintuitive ways that you can deal with them where you can disarm them really quickly. And I'd love to give you right out of the gate a hack that if you're listening in or you have a relationship and it heads down the wrong way, there's something we call the FUD crud technique that is magical.
Oh, we love buzzwords and buzz phrases around here. Have at it, man. You're already making us love you. Go for it.
So picture this. You're dealing with someone and they're venting their frustration with you. Now, what you often do is when they're doing that, you get a little bit agitated, you get a little bit nervous, you don't want it to escalate, and you don't know how to calm it down. And so one of the worst things you can say is say, now calm down, get a hold of it.
Relax.
Relax.
Oh, God,
relax.
That's the worst.
So here's the FUD crud technique. So imagine that person has been venting at you. And again, if they see that you're about to shut them down or say relax, they're going to get agitated. And what you do is when they pause, you wait 1 to 2 seconds.
Wait, hold a second. You got a motorbike behind you.
Well, it's not as soundproof as your.
No, but the motorbike happened at a very inopportune moment. Okay, you pause 1 to 2 seconds, and the motorbike.
Yeah, they just wanted to get away. That's how they felt the best way to deal with it. So picture this: that they say something, they're venting, and they're expecting you to get defensive, to say, "Now relax, now calm down." But instead, wait 1 to 2 seconds. They're a little bit off balance because this is not your usual response, and that's when you employ the FUD crud maneuver or technique, and you say to them, "You sound frustrated, and I think you're holding back."
Is that a little different than "you mad, bro"?
Absolutely.
Okay. Explain how, please.
So you say to them, "You sound frustrated, and I think you're holding back." And they go, "What?" And this is where the FUD comes in. "You sound frustrated, and I think you're holding back because I think you're upset and disappointed too. So why don't you tell me what you're frustrated, upset, and disappointed about? Maybe we can get through this better than we usually do." And you start out that way because everybody's willing to talk about being frustrated. They don't feel like you're scolding them or you're criticizing them. Whereas if you said to them, "You sound upset, you sound angry," they're going to say, "I'm not upset, I'm not angry." And it just fuels that. But when you do it this way, and then they'll talk about it, and here's what you're listening for. So I used to train FBI and police hostage negotiators, and this was also part of the tips I would give them. What you want to do is you want to listen for emotionally charged words. And so when that person tells you what they're frustrated about, and they use words like "you never," "you always," or words like that, let them launch that at you, and you say more about the never, or say more about the always. So what you're doing is you're doing a Muhammad Ali with George Foreman rope-a-dope. And so they say more about that. And then you say, and this is important to say, "If I was you, I'd be upset." So in other words, you don't want to tell them they're upset and you're better than them. If I was you, I'd be upset too. What are you upset about? And then when they talk about that, again, have them go deeper and tell you more about whatever those emotional words are. But if you watch, you're going to see that they calm down. And then the final thing is to say, "And if I was you, I'd be disappointed. Disappointed in me, disappointed that we're going through this again, disappointed in you. What's that about?" But can you picture, Scott, in your mind's eye that you've just peeled off the agitation of the onion? You've helped them talk it and walk it through. And if you don't rush them, by the time you get to what they're disappointed about, you're going to be having close to a dialogue instead of an argument.
Would this quite literally Karen-proof us? Is it foolproof? Does it work most of the time, some of the time? What's the real-world reliability of that? Because it sounds so utterly powerful.
I think it works most of the time, but the key is you have to sort of practice it. And also, if you have a relationship with this person, and when they're talking about finally what they're disappointed in, here's the keeper. And here's how you can turn an argument into maybe getting lucky that night, is because what's going to happen is they may look away from you because this is a very tender conversation, and we've turned into emotionally shy people in the world. People don't talk and get closer. People are transactional. And so when they reach the point of telling you what they're disappointed about, they may not be looking at you because they're shy, because it's so intimate. And you say to them, "Look up at me. Come on, look up at me." And then looking up at you. And no matter what they said, you look at them and you say, "I understand. I was wrong. I'm going to fix this. And I'm sorry."
Kind of the Ho'oponopono bit, the Hawaiian kind of ritual of reconciliation and forgiveness, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the 4 steps. First of all, "I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you," is the simple Ho'oponopono bit. You know, kind of made famous by Tony Robbins and a bunch of other self-help gurus. So what you're talking about is something like that, right?
I think that's excellent. Whatever works. But I think the beauty of the FUD approach, and we call it FUD crud so people can remember it easier.
Fear, uncertainty, and doom, right?
No, but you can picture how you're disarming the other person.
Yeah, well, I think it's good. I think it's great. I think it's powerful. One of the things you and I were talking about beforehand is you had a desire to talk to these guys about why mansplaining is a thing with angry women in particular, and why trying to explain things to women is what makes them nuts. And along those lines, one of the things you just suggested saying was, I'm going to fix this. Now, how is that different than explaining something to a woman and saying, I'm going to take care of this? Because we've been told in relationship advice, men are always trying to fix stuff and, we should just shut up and listen. So where does all this intersect?
Well, where it intersects is if you can lead them through frustration, upset, and disappointment, and you're having a conversation and a dialogue in the disappointment, unless you're really cold-hearted and burned out on the relationship, you're going to be able to look into their eyes and you're going to feel some compassion for the pain and frustration you caused them, as opposed to just transactionally just getting them to vent, get stuff off their chest, and can we move on? So what helps with the FUD crud approach is that when they're talking to you about what they're disappointed in, you're actually seeing the pain underneath the anger. And if you care about them, they're actually being vulnerable with you. Whereas the other approach, you're just checking boxes, but they really haven't opened up to you. Can I share something with your audience and you that I don't think you've ever heard before about what's going on underneath all this?
Sure.
Maybe you've heard this before. When people are agitated, there's a stress hormone called cortisol. And cortisol gets secreted from the adrenals, and cortisol readies the body to deal with battle and to deal with stress. And when stress goes up, it tickles something in your brain called an amygdala. And an amygdala is in your brain, and it's like the point guard dealing with your emotions. So when cortisol goes up and stress goes up, it triggers your amygdala to shunt blood away from your upper brain into your lower survival brain. So you literally are a deer in the headlights. And that's why you can't think when you're under an amygdala hijack. Well, what most people don't understand, and a lot of people meditate, which can help you when you're stressed out. But what a lot of people don't understand, and I'm guessing some of your listeners are hearing for the first time, high oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone, counteracts high cortisol. So if you think of someone being stressed out and they're meditating to calm the high cortisol down, it's a little bit like your car is racing and you step on the brakes to pull it over to the side. Whereas when you can elevate oxytocin and bonding, it's like pulling your car over to the side of the road, stopping and taking the keys out of the ignition. How does this apply to men and women? Is that women are, when they're all stressed out and they have high cortisol, they want to feel felt by you as opposed to figured out and advised by you unless they ask for it. And so when they feel felt by you and helping them talk out the frustration, the upset and disappointment, they feel felt by you. Oxytocin goes up, their cortisol goes down, their amygdala goes back into their holster, blood flow goes back up to their upper brain, and they can give themselves solutions. But we don't know that. And so every time we give them advice that they don't want or solutions, and they say, just listen to me, what they're really saying is, just let me get it off my chest, and then I'll come up with my own advice. But what happens is they scare the hell out of us. And so we try to calm them down, which just thwarts their being able to feel felt. And they don't get that surge of oxytocin to calm themselves down from the inside out. Now, have you ever heard that?
I think I've heard something along those lines, but you've fleshed it out in such detail that I'm absolutely blown away. And I'll tell you what, this is the benefit of having an actual medical doctor get on this show and talk about this stuff. As you were talking, Mark, several things crossed my mind, and I'd love to get your take on all of them, okay? The first one is, I think a lot of guys are really impatient in those kind of conversations. Like, can we just please get this over with so you're happy again? And yeah, I'll do whatever you want. Fine, whatever. And that's kind of a masculine, black-white, engineerish way of looking at things. And yet the woman wants to be heard, wants to be felt, just like you said, all that touchy-feely stuff. And what we're doing by not getting that and kind of ham-fisting our way through it, being impatient or just trying to find some mechanical way to get past it or logic our way out of it. Oh boy, are we ever guilty of that as men often. All we're doing is raising her cortisol levels. We're stressing her out even more. And then we're more upset because she's even more upset. I'm thinking of like the old Lucy show with Ricky Ricardo and Lucy. It's amazing they were ever married in real life when you see how they interact and the chemistry they had on screen. But I mean, it's just such a classic example. So much to the point that when we saw it on those old shows, we found it humorous. It was so almost ironically funny. But one thing I do absolutely know is if you do listen to a woman, if you do say, I'm going to do better, or I apologize, or I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you, all those things. One of the most powerful gestures that can eventually happen between a man and a woman, and this goes for whether you are clearing up an argument or she's stressful without any argument or animosity towards you. Indeed, one of the most powerful gestures is to simply hug her and hold her and always wait for her to let go first. And if the timing feels right, say, everything's going to be all right. Now, listen, if she believes that, she'll calm down. If you're a liar and it can't be made all right by you or anybody else, it's not going to go well for you. So you have to be able to hold a woman, tell her everything's going to be okay, and have her believe it, or else. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. Here's another tip that goes along with that. So we're giving nuggets that hopefully your listeners can use, maybe use today, maybe use tonight. One of the ways to turn an argument around in a second is to pause when you're yelling at each other or trying to calm them down. And if you can just ask the question in your mind, what's it like for the other person right now? Just being able to stop you being agitated and being curious, it changes everything. Here's another little bit of science. The reason for that, when you're curious, that is using your sensory part of your nervous system. When you're venting, it's using the motor part of your nervous system. So just being curious, what's it like for the other person now? You can't do that and vent your anger at the same time. And here's what happens is just being curious can stop the fight. I remember years ago, my wife and I were in one of those things, and it was kind of, we were trading tit for tat. It was kind of escalating. And then I asked myself, what's it like for her right now? And I thought, she doesn't like this any more than I do. And so instead of continuing the escalation, I paused and I said, you don't like where this is going any more than I do you? She said, what? I said, you don't like where this is going any more than I do, because if it keeps going the way it usually does, you're going to say something, I'm going to say something, we're going to be sleeping in separate rooms. And then, we'll tiptoe back, maybe tomorrow morning or something. But you don't like where this is going any more than I do you? And she looked at me and she says, I hate it when we get into these arguments. And I looked at her and I said, do you have any idea how we can keep it from going there? And she gave me this big smile, let go of the anger, and she said, no, but you're doing real good.
That's excellent. I'm immediately reminded of the movie Cool Hand Luke. And absolutely the most famous scene from that is when the boss man culminates the scene by saying, I don't like it any better than you men. That's the last line of the scene.
Mm-hmm.
The first line of the scene is, what we have here is failure to communicate. And in a way, even with a bunch of men in 1930 or 40s Louisiana in the penal system, it seems like the boss knew what you were talking about just now. And he was, I don't know, kind of in a roughshod manner, trying to enact that in all the wrong ways, but weirdly and perhaps ironically with some of the right words. But in the real world with your wife, trying to put yourself in their position and saying, I don't like this any more than you do, or you don't like where this is going, really does kind of soothe the savage beast somewhat, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm remembering that movie for that famous line. I blog a lot, and I think I wrote an article. I think if people search for it, they may find it. And I updated it to, I think it was Cool Hand Luke 2.0. And I said, The modern version of it is to use the boss's Louisiana accent. What we've got here is failure to empathize.
Yes.
We got here failure to empathize. And I actually wrote an article about why people, especially in the business world, fear empathizing with other people. I mean, not fear empathy from them, but empathizing with other people, because they're afraid if I really empathize with the other person and I actually really care about them, what if they want something that's not what I'm selling?
Yeah, right. What if I send them into the arms of the competition?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, I have an interesting anecdote, and since your audience are mainly men, I do a presentation to an international accelerator every quarter about how to pitch to investors. And one of the things that I tell them, and you might find this interesting, or your listeners who have businesses and they are pitching to investors, what I say to this collection of startups, and this is they're usually at the stage of they ran out of friends and family money, so they have to actually pitch to investors. And I said, when you're pitching to an investor and they smile, do you think it's a yes? And the greener ones say yes. I say, it's not a yes. Investors do not smile. Money is serious. The reason that they're smiling is because they see that you put so much effort into a 30-minute presentation, and after 3 minutes, they realize they're not interested, and they're smiling, trying to cover up their really wanting to be rude and say, I've heard enough, done.
All you have to do is watch a couple episodes of Shark Tank, and you'll figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so what I'm coaching these startups to do is when those people smile and you know it's not a yes, and this is how to use empathy, is what you say to them is you pause. You'll see that my leitmotif is always this pausing under things because it shifts the conversation from transactional to something else. You pause, and then you say to them, when we started our conversation, we were level. You had money to invest, and I was a company who needed your money. And now what's happened is you have money to invest, and I'm a company that's not going to see it anytime soon. And so I think what you were listening for or looking for, you didn't hear. And we tried to put together what we thought you were listening for or looking for, and obviously we missed it. In the time remaining, can you tell us what you were listening for or looking for? And here's where you flip it, because that horse has left the barn if they're smiling, so you've lost it anyway. And then you say, tell me again what you were listening for or looking for that might have caused you to want to give us money. And then you hear what they have to say, and you might be able to pivot and say, oh, we have that. We just didn't put that in the deck. But what I'm coaching them to do, because they're in a group of other startups, is to say, oh, we don't have that, but I know 2 or 3 companies that I could introduce you to that I think could deliver on that. And I'm happy to send you a little material on them. And if it's a good match, I can make an introduction between them and you. And what's happened is by letting go of your having to be right and get money from them and focusing on the investor being successful and being able to introduce them to other companies where they could work together, you've turned a situation that was going south real fast into something in which you now have a relationship with that investor and the people you introduce the investor to, and you can contact them going forward because they're all grateful to you.
Well, you make it sound so simple, but boy, that would take brass balls.
But doesn't it make sense empathically?
Yeah,
that they.
Of course. But man, to disrupt your own presentation and throw on the table what the objection is that you're seeing before your very eyes that's as yet remained unsaid, man, that takes some chutzpah. But I can see how it would work.
Well, when you pitch to enough investors and too many of them have smiled, and it turned out not to be, oh, this is exciting, how do we move forward? But thank you. Oh, send us some materials, and you'll never see them again.
Wow. Oh, yeah. Can you give me some more information on that? Can you send me the website and I'll look at the link? Yeah, you'll never hear from them. And another thing is, if they thank you for your time afterwards, that's usually a bad sign. I don't know. I've just noticed that. Moving along, I think that's fantastic. I want to go ahead and bring up a little tactic that I used to use and see what you think about it. When I was in the IT world, back in the early days of internetworking, let's face it, a lot of that technology didn't work as advertised. And it was hard to find people who were good at working on it and coding it. So there were a lot of disappointments and a lot of things went wrong. And I happened to be working with schools and libraries who were getting lots of money given to them by the government. And they were getting paid at times 90 cents on the dollar for what they were buying. And so they had these incredible, elaborate, fancy, top-of-the-line, state-of-the-art systems, and they didn't have anybody who knew how to run them. So they depended on our companies a lot to help them get that stuff going and running. The problem was we didn't have enough people in our entire company to handle just them as one customer, let alone the whole lot of them. And my customers would get furious. Oh my gosh, would they get mad. And of course, I was their point of contact as the sales guy, and they would let me have it. And I wanted to be conciliatory. I wanted to give them that proverbial hug and tell them that everything was going to be all right, but it wasn't going to be all right. And I just found a new strategy. My new strategy was to get angrier at the snafu, or sometimes it was a full-on foobar, let's be realistic, than they were. They would go, I paid for this technician to be here every day of every work week, and it's been 2 weeks, and we haven't seen one technician yet. And your stuff promised it would do this, and we were supposed to get 40 of them. We only got 20 of them. It doesn't interface with this like you promised. Blah, blah, blah. I need help, and you and your company suck. And I'll be like, you know what? I understand completely why you're mad, and not only that, but this, this, and this. And if I have something to do with it, you're going to get this, this, and this, and we're going to up the ante and do this for you, and we should have done this for you, and blah, blah, blah. And the customers would calm down, rock back on their heels, and go, oh, it's not that bad. I mean, we're all just working here. I sense you're going to get this stuff done for me, or at least try, and that's all I asked for. And I'm like, you bet I am. All right, cool. Can we go have lunch now? And that's how it would invariably go, because deep down, they were just hoping to be heard and helped. They knew they weren't going to possibly get every answer to every question solved beautifully because, hey, it was technology. So I found a cool little strategy there, and it was not only replicable, but it was very predictable.
Well, it's because you didn't take issue. You agreed with them. And in my book, Just Listen, which was a book that preceded Talking to Crazy, I shared a concept called the Mirror Neuron Gap. And so mirror neurons are a part of our brain that seems to be connected with imitation, learning, and empathy. And when they're not working correctly, a deficiency in them seems to be associated with autism or being on the spectrum. You can't connect, you can't mirror other people. And so what you did is you mirrored their anger with your own anger, and you lowered the mirror neuron gap between you so they felt and justified. And even then, you actually rewarded them for their anger by what you were going to do with them. Here's a side issue which you might find interesting. When I used to do presentations on Just Listen, I'd say one of the reasons that we cry at tearjerker movies, think Field of Dreams if you're older. Can I have a catch that? Want to have a catch dad at the end? Or Silver Lining Playbook with Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence at the end where they say they love each other. The reason we cry at tearjerker movies is because we kind of identify with the conflict in the movie. Oh, I have a conflict with my dad, just like Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams, or a conflict with my boyfriend or my girlfriend, just like in Silver Lining Playbook. And what happens is we're identifying with the gap between the mirroring between the main characters. And then when the gap is closed, we start to cry. Why? Because when the gap is closed, what was high cortisol suddenly gets flooded with oxytocin. And in the flood of that oxytocin, we cry with relief.
Hollywood just plays that like a violin, don't they?
Absolutely.
As you were talking, I was relating all of this in my mind back to relationships. And I can remember specific times where my wife was upset or somebody had treated her wrong. And if I get equally upset and take her feelings seriously, for lack of a better way to put it, and go do something about it, or go try to make this right, or go talk to the manager after that manager is mistreated my wife when I wasn't there. By the way, it still happens all the time in the automotive business. Oh man, women are just disrespected. So I've had those conversations. And I'll notice my wife get choked up. Like, you're my hero. I mean, that's all it takes to be a manly hero to a woman, to be a provider and a protector, is to get exactly what you're talking about. Meanwhile, I've heard other women tell me stories about how something legitimately upsetting happened to them, and their boyfriend, husband, significant other kind of laughs it off or plays it off or tells them they're overreacting, and the woman's just left there holding the bag, and that just increases the cortisol and makes them more upset. Bad handling by the guy, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they take the other person's side. I'm sorry for interrupting you. And that makes it even worse. You know, you start to take the other person's point of view. And I'll tell you, if you have a relationship in which, and that's a very common pattern, in which you're taking the other person's point of view when your girlfriend or your wife brings up something, one of the things you might want to figure out is you're in a state of disappointment and resentment towards your partner. And you need to get that up and out, because when you take someone else's side against her, you don't really care about the particular argument. You're just doing something to get even with her. And what's fueling it is a lot of disappointment and resentment that you haven't unpacked.
I've heard stories from women who have gotten up in the middle of dates and left, specifically because whatever she said the guy disagreed with told her she was wrong and made her feel stupid. I mean, women are supposed to be on our team. We're supposed to find someone we connect with, not turn them all into adversaries. And then these are the same guys that come to me going, well, these women are all bitter and hate men. It's like, look in the freaking mirror, dude. I mean, probably a quarter of the time, that's the issue with guys who are seeing that pattern over and over. Fascinating stuff. And I trust that this entire conversation has really empowered a lot of guys to almost perform magic in their relationships with women, but it's all scientifically based. Before we go, Dr. Mark Goulston, I want you to tell us a little bit about something that you're deeply passionate about, and that is suicide intervention and prevention. And I think that's something that, although guys may not have signed up to listen to the show to hear, I think is something a lot of guys, well, we should be a little bit more empowered with knowledge in this area too. So go ahead and tell us what you'd like to on that.
Yeah, for about 25 years, one of my subspecialty areas as a psychiatrist was suicide prevention. And I had a pretty good track record since none of them died by suicide. And one of the things that I learned that worked, and I've given it a name, I actually have co-authored 2 books during COVID. One's called Why Cope When You Can Heal, and the next one is Trauma to Triumph, a roadmap for leading through disruption and thriving on the other side. In Why Cope When You Can Heal, I introduced to the world the approach that I use with suicidal teenagers, young adults, and it's called surgical empathy. And if you haven't been suicidal, you won't understand this and consider yourself fortunate. But people who are suicidal, death is compassionate to pain that won't go away. They tuck it in the back of their pocket. They say, worst comes to worst, I can always kill myself. And so what surgical empathy is it's going in and causing them to not just feel understood and have treatments thrown at them. It's causing them to feel felt by you the way death promises to relieve their suicidality. And when they feel felt by you, that's the surgical empathy. They may let go of death as the way to fix it and latch on to feeling felt by you.
Well, it sounds to me, Mark, like you're somehow suggesting a scientific premise for talking someone off the ledge.
Well, there is a scientific premise, because what's happening is, if you go back to what we've talked about, is their whole life is filled with stress they can't escape from, feeling foolish, feeling like they're a failure. We see this with a lot of veterans. We see this with a lot of burned out healthcare workers. So the cortisol is through the roof. There's no oxytocin going on. There's no relief from it. All the meditation in the world is just putting lipstick on a pain. But when they feel felt by you, when you're not judging them for wanting to take the pain away because it's so awful, and when they look at you and they say, so I'm not weak, and when you get a sense of how awful their pain is and say, I don't think you're weak. I've said to some suicidal patients, you're stronger than me, because if I felt what you felt, I would have killed myself years ago.
Well, that seems like such a scary thing to utter out loud, but it works.
Well, they felt. In fact, it's slightly humorous. This one person says, so you don't think I'm weak or crazy for being suicidal because the pain's too much? I said, I told you, you are not weak. I think you're stronger than me. Crazy's another matter.
Wow. That's important work. And thank you for everything you do. And I think that is very illuminating for all of us as guys, not only if we know someone who's struggling in that area, but maybe even if we are, I have to ask you a question before we wrap this up. Were you ever single at the time you were a full-fledged medical doctor, psychiatrist?
Yes.
What was it like to date? Because everybody I've ever talked to who's either a psychiatrist or who is trying to date a psychiatrist was freaked out over it. Because all the psychiatrists say, nobody wants to date me because as soon as they find out I'm a psychiatrist, they think I can see right through them transparently and know all their thoughts. And everybody I know who's tried to date a psychiatrist or even really a psychologist looks at it from the opposite perspective. Did you have that problem? Did you shield from these women that you were a psychiatrist until you just couldn't anymore? Did you handle it differently?
I think I handled it differently because you be the judge of it. You've had doctors on, maybe you've had psychiatrists on. I don't think I have a clinical presence because the clinical presence feels distant. And I think one of the things that enabled me to reach my patients who had suicidal thoughts is they felt connected to by me. And so I never ran into that problem. But now people listening in might say, you sound really clinical. You really sound professional. But to me, being clinical is helpful. It's objective. It's professional, but it's distant. And I don't think people necessarily, you can be the judge of it. Do you feel clinically distant from me in our conversation?
No, I think you sound almost as warm as Fred Rogers, frankly.
Well, you can be in my neighborhood anytime you want.
You know what? Kind of off the record, I've told these guys that I think Fred Rogers is a real man, even though he's not macho, because he had his purpose. He knew what he was good at. He made the world a better place, and he was very confident as he did what he did and powerful as a man, being a hero and providing and protecting and being that spirit that kind of embodies a lot of what you talked about. It's probably no accident that I thought of him because he was very empathetic and he wanted you to feel felt. He understood all this stuff. But, I think it's hilarious because you are not the kind of person who I can imagine sitting there silently judging me. And so I imagine the women you dated felt the same way. I think that's fantastic. Terrific.
I may need a note from you from my wife of 43 years. I'll leave you with a nice quip so we can wrap this up. And I think you'll get a chuckle and your listeners will get a chuckle, even though you'll say, oh, you were doing so fine, Doc, until you said that last thing. Here's my last quip for all of you. Being tolerated in a relationship feels awful until you realize how difficult you are, and then it's a gift.
That kind of rhymes with my adage I've coined, which is the only thing worse than settling for someone is being settled for.
Ooh, I love that.
Which is true, by the way. Oh, God, It's humiliating. His name is Dr. Mark Goulston. He is the author of many books, including Talking to Crazy, How to Deal with the Irrational and Impossible People in Your Life. I'm going to go ahead and put that book at the top of my Amazon influencer queue, which you can reach as always by going to mountaintop.com/Amazon. I'm also going to put the other books that Dr. Mark Goulston mentioned, along with a couple others that I find interesting up there. You're going to be able to really load up your shopping cart with a lot of good, solid reading by this very smart guy who very much knows his stuff. And by the way, we love guys who know their stuff around here, Dr. Mark, and you're absolutely one of them. And as always, I'm also going to set up a special URL for Dr. Mark's book, Talking to Crazy in particular. You can go to mountaintoppodcast.com/crazy. Why not, right? To get yourself a copy of that. mountaintoppodcast.com/crazy to get yourself a copy of Dr. Mark Goulston's book. Dr. Mark Goulston, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a fantastic, illuminating, and powerful conversation. I would say this has got to be one of those episodes in particular where we're all going to feel like we're taking a lot of practical use away from it. Fantastic stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I squeeze in one quick plug for a audio course if people like the sound and soothingness of my voice as opposed to finding it too boring and too labored?
For sure. Go for it.
Himalaya Learning does audio courses, and they have by Seth Godin, I think Tim Ferriss, and I have an audio course up there called Defeating Self-Defeat, because my first book, Get Out of Your Own Way, published in 1996, made it to the Wall Street Journal bestseller list in mid-May this year. Go figure. But if you found how I communicate and what I communicate of interest, please check out Himalaya.com/defeat. Himalaya.com/defeat. And you can catch the audio course, Defeating Self-Defeat.
Man, how many times do I talk to guys on coaching calls with whom the central problem is they can't get out of their own way? Oh, man, that's repeated over and over in coaching calls. And wow, we guys, especially the smart intelligentsia amongst us, boy, we really struggle with that. So yeah, that's good stuff. Say that URL one more time. Himalaya.com/defeat. And I think if you use the code DEFEAT under promo, you can hear it for free. Once again, thank you for joining us today, Mark Goulston. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And guys, if you haven't been to mountaintoppodcast.com just yet, please go there. Sign up for my free daily newsletter where you'll find fluff-free advice on how to get better with women, be better as a man in general. You can also sign up to talk to me for free using the red button, either top dead center if you're on a mobile device or in the upper right-hand corner if you're on a desktop. And get on my schedule and talk to me about where you are right now, where you want to be. We can put a plan of action together in place that's going to take you from where you are right now to where you want to be in various areas of your life, but especially getting that right woman into your life right here, right now. Hey, fall is coming upon us. It is time to get your nose to the grindstone and make this happen. Can't believe 2021 is, man, almost 2/3 of the way over. Man, it seemed like 2020 just went on and on for like 5 years with COVID and everything. But yes, absolutely, you can sign up to talk to me for free. I love talking to you guys. And if it goes longer than 25 minutes, hey, that's okay. All of that and much more is there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com, including our two wonderful sponsors, as always, Origin in Maine and Hero Soap. They will make you smell good, make you feel good, make you look good. Check them both out. You can go to mountaintoppodcast.com/origin or mountaintoppodcast.com/hero soap and use the code MOUNTAIN10 for either when you partake of their wonderful items that they have for you. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.